Okay, so this is Unit 1, Webinar 1. So this is the only webinar in this unit. And what we're going to cover this evening is we're going to look at Unit 1 material, key points to take away. And what we're going to do is we'll look at parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 6, and some of the key points from each of those PowerPoints. Then I'll have a talk you through Unit 1 Assessment 1, so some tips for completing your first assessment. And what I'll do then is give you an example for the Part 5 process that you were given. So that was how to assess a piece of healthcare information. So that'll help you in completing your assessment. And then I just want to give you some tips on kind of how to move forward with your studies. So the format for NT, or the Nutritional Therapy Diploma, is slightly different to NLC. And in some ways, there's less direction in areas. So I just want to give you some tips as to how you might approach the units, and just hopefully to have a bit of a discussion about the different ways in which you can do that. So what we're going to look at, and I'm going to try to stick to time. So we're going to take a look at some of the key points to take away from the PowerPoints or the material within this unit, because it covers quite a lot of breadth of material. You know, this unit is really aimed at helping to orientate you into the course and outline to you specific skills that you're going to develop over the next year in particular, and really 2 years. So it might seem like there's a lot of information, and that's why I just want to maybe go through each part and highlight some of the key points to take away, and hopefully that'll kind of help to ground you into the material. What we can do is we're going to go through each of them. It's very brief, but it's just to kind of do a bit of a recap. And if at any point you have any questions, let me know, and we'll see how we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover that, and then we will, as I said, look at the assessment. So the first PowerPoint that you looked at, that was statistics on chronic disease. And as I said, the real aim of that was to help orientate you to the prevalence of chronic disease. So what is chronic disease, or what are the common chronic diseases? What's the prevalence of them, and what's the global burden? And that PowerPoint was really as well introducing you into something called epidemiology. And epidemiology is sometimes called the science of public health. And it really aims to try and determine what's the prevalence of a disease, so how many people have a disease, what's the predictive trend, so how many people might have the disease in the future, what's the global burden of the disease, so how having a disease is affecting the person and the economy, what are the risk factors associated with the disease, and then based on that, sometimes they will hopefully generate public health recommendations. So it's a real component of public health, and it tends to look at for the most part, looks at populations, so large populations of individuals. So it's not looking at people individually, it's looking at groups of individuals and making broad recommendations. And this kind of helps us to get an understanding of, well, how many people are experiencing chronic disease, and what might we be able to do to help them. So it's just important to have an awareness of what these terms mean. You don't have to, learn them off by heart. It's just to it's starting to give you or introduce you to some new terms that you're going to see when you look at different research papers, really. So that's just something to take away from that part, is these are the different terms. And in that part as well, you were introduced to some of the statistics on chronic disease. We can see that we're living longer. However, we're living with more years of ill health. So whilst the life expectancy is going up, our health life expectancy is going down. So we're living with longer years of disease, and it's having a toll on not only individuals' health, but also the economy. And what we're seeing as well is that there's a shift from the prevalence of communicable diseases, which are like infectious diseases, to an increase in non-communicable diseases. So they're chronic diseases. It's another term for chronic disease. And that's not just within high income countries or high socioeconomic countries. That's across the board in low, middle and high. So this is a global epidemic of chronic disease, and particularly around obesity and metabolic syndrome, which we'll look at. I also want to highlight, it's a lot of not effort, but a lot of skill set goes into generating that data. And that resource that I pointed you to, it's called the GBD Compare. It was a link I gave to you, and it's an amazing resource where you can go and look at your own country or region and see, well, what's the mortality, and like what are people dying from within a specific age group, what's the dailies, what are the years of life lost. So it's a really amazing resource, and that's something that you can come back to again and again. And as you move through the studies with us, sometimes you might want to, come back to something like that. And it's an amazing resource, and it's a collation of a huge amount of data. So as I said, we can see that chronic disease is increasing. And so here are some of the main chronic diseases. So we've got heart disease and stroke, cancer, chronic respiratory diseases, and diabetes. And what's really interesting here, and this really applies to the course, so I just want to make sure I'm on time, is that the World Health Organization, and this paper is old, however, at the same time, this is just a really good diagram because it kind of brings in the environment and then also lifestyle factors. But these intermediate risk factors here of blood pressure, raised blood glucose, abnormal blood lipids, and obesity, they're collectively termed, or when they're grouped together, an individual might be diagnosed with something called metabolic syndrome. And metabolic syndrome is basically a cluster of imbalances that tend to precede the development of a disease. And we're going to study metabolic syndrome in a lot more detail in Unit 10. So I'm your unit leader there. And we're going to look at, well, what exactly is it? And we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at, well, what are the nutrition, lifestyle, and environmental factors that contribute to the development of it? So metabolic syndrome, it's a great imbalance or syndrome to study because it tends to precede the development of all these different chronic diseases that people are experiencing. And whilst the World Health Organization have said that, an unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, and tobacco use can lead to the development of metabolic syndrome, there still isn't consensus as to what exactly is a healthy diet and what exactly we should be eating. More and more research is coming out about personalized nutrition, which I'm going to talk to you about in a second. There's some general consensus that, we should be eliminating refined carbohydrates. Ultra processed food is not good for us. Sugary beverages are not good for us. But in terms of what they often call the macronutrient wars, how much carbohydrates or fat should one be eating, there isn't consensus. So we're going to look at some of that in Unit 10. Now you'll have touched on it in NLC for those of you who've done NLC, but we're going to look at it as well in more detail in Unit 10. So that's some of the modifiable risk factors. And the other thing is then, and this is something that you can start to look at now, because whilst I'm sure many of the people who are studying this course, you're making choices to eat, whole foods, unprocessed foods, what would generally be considered a healthy diet, even though there's not an exact diet for everyone. And there's a lot of people out there who don't eat, whole foods. And part of the reason for this is globalization and a number of factors, and really the environment that we're living in. And the nutrition transition article we've given to you, I'm going to actually upload it with some key points to take away, because I'm aware that some of it is quite heavy, some of the information, but I'm going to upload the article again and highlight some of the key points. But to get an understanding of how our environment has changed over the last 40 years, I'd encourage you, if you get a chance, it's not an essential media for Unit 1, but watching the documentary series, The Men That Made Us Fat, it's quite enlightening, and it's a nice way to kind of, as opposed to constantly having to read reams of text, to kind of gain an understanding or some perspective as well as to how our environment's changed, what's driven that change, and what why, or what is the resulting obesity epidemic that's resulted from it. So, if you don't get a chance before the end of this unit, I'd encourage you over during the course to watch this, and we will come back to this documentary in Unit 10. That being said, to pass the assessments in this unit, you don't have to watch it, but I'm sure you'll find it really interesting if you do. I have all my family watching it, and half of them aren't interested in nutrition, so I'm sure you will be. So that's part one. So hopefully that unit kind of helped, or that part helped to kind of orientate you to chronic disease and how we study it. Then the next part is an introduction to the functional medicine model. Now, this is an important PowerPoint as well, because it helps, again, I'm going to use the word orientation about 30 times this evening, but it's another part that is going to help orientate you into the course, and particularly the practice of nutritional therapy. And again, you're not going to be assessed on any information within this PowerPoint in this unit, but later on we will compare different models and how they approach chronic disease. But hopefully this is going to give you an insight as to what you're going to be, how you're going to be working, and why you're going to be working in a certain way when you practice as a nutritional therapist. So this is one of the key slides, or one of the summary slides from part 2. So in part 2, the material covered why do we need the functional medicine model, what exactly is the functional medicine model, and how does it work. So we're just going to briefly go through some of the aspects of that now. So you can see here, so chronic disease levels are rising to epidemic levels worldwide. However, longevity is increasing in the same countries, meaning that healthcare systems are suffering with a growing burden of disease. So you saw that in part 1. And a growing body of evidence suggests that diet and lifestyle may be important factors in managing these conditions, but such therapeutic interventions may also require an individualized approach. So this is really important to note, that with the rise in technology that enabled us to study the human genome. So if you remember, there was the Human Genome Project. It was a project that was funded by NIH, which is the National Institute for Health in America, and they were able to map our genes. With the technology that evolved from that, or the information that evolved from that, enabled us to see that we all respond to food differently. But also what came from that as well was we were able to study the gut microbiome in much more detail. And that's also influenced our understanding of how we respond to food. So there isn't, at the moment, there's a whole area of research going on. It's kind of, there's something called the omics revolution, and that's kind of studying our genes, our genetics, and looking also at epigenetics, so how we respond to food. Metabolomics is the compounds within our blood, and then also how our gut microbiome contribute to that as well. And collectively, what this science is saying is that we all respond to food differently based on our genes, but also the environment that has enabled or contributed to the expression of our genes. And that a one size doesn't fit all. That just isn't going to work. And so some people might eat quite a high carbohydrate diet containing, healthy whole grains, and that might really work for them. Whereas someone else might need a much more high fat diet, or that contains animal produce even, or healthy meats. So this isn't an exact science, or there isn't, how do I say this? There isn't, conclusions haven't fully been drawn from the research. And that's really important to note. This kind of area of science is still in its infancy, and there's a huge amount of growth happening within it. But what is emerging is that we all respond to food differently, and based on our genes and what our genes have been embedded within. And therefore we have to create personalized plans. And this is why the functional medicine model is such a great model of healthcare, and it's why we need it, because it basically applies the principles of personalized nutrition, and it provides a framework for practitioners such as nutritional therapists to work. So as nutritional therapists, we work within the functional medicine model. And as a result of being able to work within that model, we can create, you can see here, personalized nutrition and lifestyle plans. So this is really important. It's kind of highlighting why NT, or why NT needs functional medicine. So let's briefly look at again what IFM is. So functional medicine believes that chronic disease is usually preceded by long periods of declining function or dysfunction in one or more bodily systems. So within IFM, they're more concerned with how not necessarily what the disease the person has. That can be helpful to kind of put a marker there, but they really want to know, or we really want to know, what are the underlying imbalances or disordered physiology that's contributed to the development of the disease, and how has that evolved over time. So there's this timeline aspect of IFM that's really important. And basically IFM, it examines and explores these patterns of dysfunction by linking the physiological processes of each body system together, the effect of psychological processes on the body, and the influence of fundamental lifestyle factors on these processes. So that's a real key statement or outline of what IFM does. It really tries to look at what are the underlying imbalances that contribute to disease. And these imbalances can come from multiple systems and they'll interact together. How does our psychology affect the development of these imbalances? And also, how do fundamental lifestyle factors like sleep, nutrition, our relationships, stress, play a role in the development of these disordered imbalances as well? And this is all what you're going to study in the course. And the key thing with IFM as well is there's this interconnection, or interaction is a really key word. How do these physiological imbalances and all the factors that influence them work together to contribute to disease, and then also work together to maintain health? So how can we create an environment that enables our system or our body to move towards a state of homeostasis or health? So I'll show you here. I'm going to jump just for 1 second. This is what you, by the time you leave this course, you'll be so familiar with this document here. So this is called the matrix, and this is how functional medicine works. So what IFM do is they organize disordered physiology into something called assimilation imbalances, communication imbalances, defense and repair, which is like the immune system, energy imbalances, biotransformation and elimination, transport and structural integrity. And they look at how do all of these imbalances interact interact with one another and contribute to health concerns and signs and symptoms. And what are the fundamental lifestyle factors? Here they're calling them personal lifestyle factors. But how does sleep and relaxation, movement and exercise, nutrition, stress and relationships, how do they affect the development of these imbalances, along with our mental, emotional and spiritual health? And ultimately, how can we then create plans that address these imbalances and support an individual to kind of regain a state of homeostasis and well-being? And so that's kind of some of the core pieces within IFM. And in this year, you're going to have 3 units that look at these imbalances in detail. So you're going to look at, well, what are the imbalances? What are the factors that contribute to them? And what are the signs and symptoms associated with them? What are the interrelationships between them? And you're going to apply all that theoretical knowledge to case studies. So it's really practical as well. What IFM also do is they have these 3 terms that they use. They're called antecedents, triggers, and mediators. And antecedents are basically, they can be imbalances or genetic predispositions that contribute to the development of a disease. And they can be acquired, so we come into life with them. So that they might be genetic. Or sorry, what did I say? Acquired or an innate. So either you come into life with them or you acquire them afterwards. So some things, genetic predisposition will be something that we already have, and then we might develop dysbiosis in the course of our life because of a number of different things, or we might have long-term toxic exposure. So there's different imbalances that can be considered antecedents. Triggers then tend to be things that trigger the development of a disease or the development of a health concern or a sign and symptom. And triggers can be foods, they can be stress, they can be microbes, and toxin exposure, lots of different things. And when you're working with the client, often you're trying to identify what was the trigger, what was the thing that pushed the person into this state of ill health. Mediators then, or perpetrators, are factors that tend to maintain someone in a state of ill health. So that might be a nutrient deficiency, it might be a hormone imbalance, and it might be dysbiosis. There's different things that can be considered a mediator. And the way IFM kind of look at these ATMs or antecedents, triggers, and mediators is, let's say an antecedent is the digging of the hole. The trigger is what pushed the person into the hole, and the mediator is what keeps them in the hole. And it's just a way of organizing a person's story so that they can see how they developed their ill health over time, and how they have reached this state of ill health. So I just want to show you, so this is the timeline as well. So you'll be using this in the course too. The two IFM clinical tools that you use is the matrix and this functional medicine timeline. And here, so we have this dotted line is just before the person was born. So they're born here, and you'll jot down their ages, and underneath here you'll put different signs and symptoms or health concerns that came up at different ages, factors or triggers that might have contributed to or triggered these events, and then mediators and antecedents that have kind of evolved over time or are keeping them in let's say the hole, as we said. So you're going to become really familiar with these tools, and you're going to use them. You're going to do 6 case studies this year, and as part of that, or we're going to give you 6 case studies, and then you're also going to do next year your own. So you're going to get a lot of experience with using this documentation. And when you are in student clinic in unit year 3, you'll be using these tools when you're seeing clients. This diagram as well. So this is quite a helpful one, because a lot of what I'm saying to you is quite abstract and it's theoretical, and actually it'll only really start to make sense when you're seeing real case studies. But hopefully this might be a helpful tool to kind of demonstrate what are the principles of IFM. So it's called the functional medicine tree, and you can see here these are all the different systems of medicine in a sense, but you've got gastroenterology, endocrinology, cardiology, which all within kind of mainstream healthcare all work as independent units. And someone might develop like a disease in the immune system or in the endocrine system, but they're usually going to be clinical imbalances that precede or contribute to the development of these diseases. And these are the clinical imbalances that I mentioned just there. So you've got assimilation, defense and repair, energy, transport, structural integrity, communication and biotransformation, and elimination. And the key thing here is that these are lifestyle factors that contribute to the development of these clinical imbalances, combined with the individual's genetic predisposition, their experiences, their mental, emotional, and spiritual influences as well. So all of these factors, these lifestyle factors, psychological factors, genetic predisposition, contribute to the development of these clinical imbalances, and then they can lead to specific disease states. And so IFM really works down here trying to understand, or an IFM practitioner, like a nutritional therapist, will work down here and try to understand, well, what are the factors that have contributed to the development of the client's health concerns, and how can I create a nutrition and lifestyle plan that helps to alleviate those imbalances. So it's really nutrition and lifestyle medicine, and it's a really exciting field, and there's more and more science coming out to kind of validate the approach, which is great. So that's the functional medicine model. As I said, you're going to have 3 units on this year. You're going to have a clinical practice unit where you apply the principles and you run a consultation, or the first part of a consultation. So if any of that information seems quite theoretical and you can't fully understand it, don't worry, you will come back to it again and again, and through practical application, you know, it'll make sense. The next part that we're going to look at is, or part 3 of the unit, was critical thinking. So critical thinking is a really, really important skill for a nutritional therapist, because you are going to be exposed to so much information, and you've got to gather all that information, disseminate it, and make reasoned judgments based on, you know, using critical thinking skills. So there's a lot of definitions of what, you know, there's a lot of kind of variations of the definition of critical thinking, but I think this one is one of the best ones out there. So critical thinking means making reasoned judgments, or, you know, decisions that are logical and well thought out. It's a way of thinking in which you don't simply accept all arguments and conclusions you're exposed to, but rather have an attitude involving questioning such arguments and conclusions. So we really want you to, or we really want to support you in developing the ability to look at a piece of information, look at all the aspects within it, and think critically, and being able to assess the information for its quality, and then make a reasoned judgment as to whether you think it's a good piece of information. So that's one aspect of critical thinking. Another aspect, though, is how you use it in the consultation. So you can see here, so I'm just going to turn on the light and say, so you can see here, this is the NT consultation framework. So this is the framework for the nutritional therapy consultation that we developed a long time ago now, but we broke the consultation down into 5 stages in order to support you while you found your feet in clinic. And really, all aspects of the consultation process require good critical thinking skills. And if you've watched the videos, hopefully you have by now, I've given you good examples of where that comes in, but it's just good to highlight here. So an interpretation is where a good interpretation requires good critical thinking skills. And the reason for that is, an interpretation is basically where you identify what clinical imbalances you think are contributing to the client's health concerns, and what nutrition, lifestyle, and environmental factors have contributed to those clinical imbalances. So in order to do that, you have to look at all the clinical imbalances the client could be experiencing, assess which ones, based on symptomology and also lifestyle exposure, which you prioritize which ones you think she is experiencing, and then prioritize which ones you think are having the biggest impact, and then create a really grounded conclusion, or make a reasoned judgment as to how you might move forward supporting that person based on your interpretation. So it requires you to look at all the different factors that could be affecting the client's health concerns. It's also important to have good critical thinking skills when you are looking at developing a stage therapeutic plan. So a stage therapeutic plan includes or outlines how you might work with the client over 3 or 4 consultations, and how you might approach supporting them with specific tests, nutraceuticals, functional foods, and lifestyle recommendations. And in order to do that, you need to be able to decide, well, what tests are viable, like you need to find good supplements, and you need to be able to critically appraise or assess information on different supplements. You need to look at research on therapeutic diets and make decisions based on the available research. So these are all examples of where critical thinking skills are important. So as I said, as an NT, it's really important that you do develop this ability over the course. Now, that being said, you don't have to worry about how you're going to develop them, because actually, through moving through the program itself, you'll be developing these skills by completing the assessments. So we're going to support you in developing these skills in a number of different ways. So, hopefully we're going to lead by example. All IHS unit leaders should display critical thinking skills through engaging in class and webinar discussions and looking at different points of view on specific topics, you're going to develop critical thinking skills. And then also by completing all of these assessments. So all of these assessments require critical thinking skills, like all of them: assessing a piece of healthcare information, evaluating elements of a case report, evaluating a research paper, completing a literature review, assessing a test and supplement company, comparing and contrasting the functional medicine model. So you're going to develop this ability to appraise information and make good decisions through completing the course itself. So that's just kind of, it's just, I suppose it's important to identify or show you that we are going to support you in developing those skills as you move through the course and why they're important. So then we have healthcare research methods. So this is the first part. There's going to be around 3 or 4 parts in total as for this, between year 1 and 2 of the course. So this is the first healthcare research methods. There's going to be one associated with unit 10. And then next year in year 2, you're going to have them, you're going to look at therapeutic diets, lifestyle interventions. So there'll be other healthcare research methods as well. So this is something that you're going to develop over time, is the ability to critically appraise healthcare information. So the part of this, or the point of that PowerPoint, part 4 it was, wasn't it? Yeah. Was to just introduce you to what exactly is science and what are the different types of studies. And this will become, again, more apparent when you actually start looking at the studies in Unit 10 and as we go through the course. But I just wanted to show you here some of the hierarchy of scientific evidence. So what we mean by evidence is if you make a health claim like, saturated fat contributes to the development of metabolic syndrome, or a ketogenic diet is a suitable intervention for someone with type 2 diabetes, you need to have evidence that backs up that statement. And within healthcare, this is considered the hierarchy of scientific evidence. Now, that being said, there's our discussion that you actually need all types of studies, that there isn't one on its own. But in general, at the moment, this is kind of what's considered the hierarchy. So we use scientific trials or studies to try and prove or disprove a hypothesis. So a statement, like the 2 that I just mentioned. And there's different ways of documenting that evidence. So down the bottom here is case reports, opinion papers, and letters. These are considered the weakest form of evidence. And in some ways, these aren't study designs themselves. These are all studies here. And these are forms of, in some ways, these 2 anyway, secondary information, but they are a way of documenting evidence. So opinion papers, they also include something called narrative reviews. So narrative reviews are where a researcher or an expert in a field will write a paper on a specific topic, and they'll be expected to gather all the information on that topic and kind of collate the information. And I think narrative reviews are such a good resource for us as nutritional therapists, because a lot of the time books can start to become out of date, and it's great, particularly let's say within the area of the gut microbiome, to get really good narrative reviews. That being said, they are open to bias. So bias in that the author of the paper, or usually there might be 1 or 2, they might have an unconscious bias towards a certain area, or they might leave out a piece of information. So there's not a systematic way of approaching a narrative review. That being said, I think they're a great source of information for us. And in Unit 4 on the course, we're going to give you some, and actually Unit 2, I'm going to give you 2 narrative reviews to look at. And you'll see that they are a great source of information once you know you're getting a good one. Case reports then is where a healthcare professional will document what they've seen in their practice. So for example, Sarah Myhill is a healthcare professional. She's a doctor who specializes in chronic fatigue syndrome. And there's not a lot of research. the field or the field of research around CFS or ME/CFS is growing, but up until recently there wasn't a lot of research. And so Sarah would document what she was seeing. Sarah might document what she was seeing in her practice. And again, it's, in my opinion, it can be a very good source of information when there's no robust science. However, it's also going to be susceptible to bias. So what I'm trying to show you here is these are the types of information. Whilst they are considered the weakest form of evidence, they still have a role within, healthcare. They're just more susceptible to bias, and that's why they're considered a weaker form of evidence. Then we have things called animal trials and in vitro studies. And so animal trials, where we're looking at animals or using animals to do experiments. In vitro is where we're looking at test tubes. So whilst they can provide good information on a topic, or demonstrate how something, if, let's say, consuming sweeteners will have an effect on the blood sugar regulation, just because a mouse or a rat responds in a certain way to a sweetener doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do the same. So they can be a good form of preliminary information, but they're not considered as strong a form of evidence as, let's say, a randomized controlled trial that's going to be done on people. Then we have these three types of studies here. So these are considered, they're called observational studies, and they're a really important part of epidemiology. Cross-sectional studies, in terms of observational, we're observing people, so they're done on humans. Cross-sectional studies are studies that look at a specific moment in time, and so a lot of the time they can be done by a survey. So they're a good study for detecting prevalence of a condition, but not necessarily incidence. They're a good way to detect prevalence, or they can sometimes look at causation or correlation. So let's say if they might do a study on people with metabolic syndrome, they could take a sample of their gut microbiome through a stool analysis and see if there's a relationship between dysbiosis or certain bacteria and the development of metabolic syndrome. However, because they're only a snapshot in time, they have their limitations. So that's cross-sectional studies. Case control studies then are where we take a group of individuals who have a disease or a condition, those who don't, and then we look back in time to see what they were exposed to. Cohort studies are a bit different. This is where we take individuals, look at what they're exposed to, and then follow them over time to see if they develop a condition. So with cohort studies, it's easier to control for confounding variables. These are factors that can kind of influence the results of the study, and that's why they're considered a stronger form of evidence. Randomized control trials, then, they're different. These are intervention studies where we'll give someone, let's say, the classic one is, give one group a drug, you give the other group, you don't give them a drug, and you see how effective the drug is. Vaccination trials at the moment, they give individuals vaccines, others don't. They see how they respond. Randomized control trials can also, though, be looking at interventions in terms of dietary interventions. So that you might give a group and suggest they eat a Mediterranean diet or a ketogenic diet, and then you follow them and you compare them to a group that maybe have eaten. A lot of the time they might put someone on a low-fat diet and see how they compare to the others. So with randomized controlled trials, it's much easier to control for, again, variables and potential flaws that might arise in the study, and that's why they're considered a really strong form of evidence. Meta-analysis and systematic reviews then is where they gather the information from, let's say, 17 randomized controlled trials, and they synthesize the information, or they might take it from 17 cohort studies, or maybe 3 case control studies, and they synthesize the information in a systematic way. And the reason why these are considered a stronger form of evidence is because you're not just looking at one study in isolation, you've gathered the data from a number of studies on the same topic. So this is the different types of studies that you're going to see as you study on the course. you don't need to remember any of this at the moment. I want to support you in doing is just that you start to familiarize yourself or become aware that there are different types of studies, so that when you see them in papers that we give you to read, you can go, oh, this is a cohort study, or oh, this is a randomized control trial. It's just introducing you to the fact that there are different types of studies. And then in Unit 10, we're going to assess the quality of an observational study. And next year in Year 2, you're going to look at the quality of randomized studies, and you're going to review systematic reviews. This is something that's going to evolve over time. So then the other thing just to show you here is, so whilst all of these studies are different in terms of how they're conducted, the study design is different, particularly for these 4 here, they'll tend to have the same format or the layout of a research paper. So some of you who've already, done third level of education or worked in research will obviously be very familiar with this, but for some people, some of you may have never seen a research study before. So they tend to be broken down into 5 parts. So the abstract, the introduction and literature review, the methods, the results, and discussion and conclusion. And all we want to support you in doing at the moment is just becoming aware that, okay, this is a format of a paper, this is how it's broken down. The method section tends to be the most detailed and hard to read. And for the moment, really what you want to be able to just read is just the abstract, the discussion and conclusion, and introduction. And so I've given you a paper just so you can see, I've given you an example, so that there was a couple of essential medias that are quite good at showing you how to approach reading a paper. And I've suggested that for that paper, it's a cohort study, I think. Yeah, it was on stress and metabolic syndrome. I've suggested you just read the abstract, the introduction and literature review, and the discussion and conclusion. Bearing in mind there's aspects of it you really won't understand, and that's absolutely fine. But it's more just to show you, okay, this is what a paper is. You will be able to understand some aspects of this. And over the next 2 years, you're going to learn how to actually read these papers and critically appraise them. And this is really important because in order to make good decisions in clinic, often you want to use research to inform your decisions. Sometimes the research won't be there and you might have to rely on anecdotal evidence, and that's something that we'll have a discussion about. But sometimes there will be really good research and you'll want to use that research to inform your clinical decisions. So that's part 4. And now what we're going to do is look at part 6, which is academic writing and referencing. And there's a couple of things I really want to highlight to you around referencing, because this is something that we want to also support you in developing. So what are the key academic principles? So critical thinking is one, so we've looked at that. Being able to construct arguments, grammar and spelling, writing in the third person, and then adhering to plagiarism guidelines, citing, referencing, and creating a bibliography. So you can read through the PowerPoint 6, Melissa Turner, who's the IQA, she wrote it, and it's quite comprehensive. It gives you some good pointers as to how to write in an academic way or format. The reason why we want to support you being able to do this is that if you are going to, some of you might go on to do research, or you might work in certain areas, but just it's a really, in general, it's a really good skill set to have in order to communicate professionally in a written context. And so that's why over the course of the program, we'll give you feedback on certain areas of your academic writing ability. So there's just one thing here that I just want to highlight. So writing in the third person. So often we're going to suggest that you write in the third person. This involves saying, instead of saying, firstly, I will discuss, there follows a discussion on. So often when we're writing in an academic way, we want to take out the personal part of it. And that's why we write in a third person. That being said, your first assessment is actually, we're going to ask you to write in the first person. So I'll explain that later on. But for most assessments, we will suggest you write in the third person. So then this is a really important part. So it's really important that you don't plagiarize whilst you're on the program. And if you do, we're going to highlight it to you. So what is plagiarism? So plagiarism is presenting someone else's work or ideas as your own. And at IHS, it's treated very seriously. It's considered an academic malpractice. So avoiding plagiarism, it's an important part of your professional academic writing. Thus, you must acknowledge all ideas that are not yours by referencing. And it's simply not enough to put something in your own words. You must also reference the source. So the way to avoid plagiarism is by referring or referencing where you got the information that you've included. So when you're writing a piece of an assessment, you're going to be taking information that you've read in a book, and that's part of academic writing. But it's really important that you highlight where you get that information from. So these are some forms of plagiarism. So using someone else's words verbatim, paraphrasing a document heavily, borrowing too many words from the author, quoting or paraphrasing without acknowledgement, so that's without referencing, copying and pasting text directly from another source. So this is really important, that you never take text directly from another source. You might maybe take a statement and you have to acknowledge, cite where you got the information from and put it in italics. But it's, for the most part, it's important that you put things in your information within your own words. Unacknowledged collaboration or assistance from another student, that comes less into the course really for the moment. It might come a bit later on. And incomplete citation. So basically, the way to avoid plagiarism is to ensure that you reference appropriately. So we're going to look at now, well, what exactly is referencing? So referencing is a way of quoting names and dates of your resources in your academic writing to demonstrate you, the reader, or to your reader or assessor, that you've researched your topic, and also to acknowledge that you have used someone else's ideas to inform your piece of work. So this sounds quite abstract, but when we look at part 5, I'll be able to show you kind of examples of where an individual should reference. And components of reference, there's kind of 3 components, but the 2 that we really focus on is in-text citations and a reference list. So if you haven't come from NLC and you've come into the course and you've come straight into NT and you haven't maybe done referencing in a while, I really suggest you make sure you do read PowerPoint 6 to see what is an in-text citation and what's required within a reference list. What I'm going to do now is just show you some key examples of specific or of references. But if you're not sure exactly what a reference is and an in-text citation, do read up on this PowerPoint. So at IHS, we recommend that you use the Harvard style of referencing. So there's different styles of referencing. We suggest you use the Harvard style. Within Harvard, though, there are then slight variations. So again, we suggest that you use the UCD Harvard referencing guidelines. And this is a really, really great resource. It's free. And I'm just going to pull it up here. It's free, so the URL is there. You'll find it in the PowerPoint. And it's great. Like, it shows you, here's Harvard style. It shows you how to reference a book with one author, a book with 4 or more authors, an ebook, an e-journal, secondary sources, a website. It's incredibly comprehensive. So if you need guidelines on how to reference, it's on this resource. There's also examples in the PowerPoint, and I'm going to go through some of them now. It also, if you do read the PowerPoint and you want to find more information as to what exactly plagiarism is, there's good information here. It explains paraphrasing in quite a lot of detail. And there's also some writing tips as well if you want some more information beyond what we've given you in the PowerPoint. So this is a really good resource, and I recommend you kind of just have a look at it. There is a couple of anomalies though that are not discussed in the UCD guidelines, and that we have them on the Part 6 PowerPoint. What I'm going to go through now is just some basic references or for books, websites, and e-journals and IHS PowerPoints, just to highlight to you what we're looking for, because this is just so important to kind of get used to using this. So this is from UCD, and it's basically, how do you reference a book with 2 or 3 authors? So I'm going to actually go on to the so you'll click in here. So what they do is they tell you how to write the reference and then how to write the in-text citation as well. So here it's the first author, the last name, it's in their initials, the second author, the last name, the initials, the third author, the initials, the year of publication, the title of the book in italics, the edition, the place of publication, and publisher. And they give an example here. So if you haven't done this in a while, it can seem really, really tedious. And I understand that it can take time to get your head back into this. But it's a really important skill that you do know how to reference appropriately, because it enables us to share information accurately. And it's kind of a language in which we kind of, we can share information, because you can go to the reference, i.e. where the person got their information from. So that's the example of the reference. And then they have the in-text citation. So in the in-text citation, you don't include the initials. It's just the first author's last name, the second author's last name, and the third author's last name and the year. And you can see here, there it is, and then the brackets, or if you can write it in another way as well. So the author's name and then the date. So the first example here is if you're mentioning the authors in the sentence itself. So if you were saying here, let's say Shalloway suggests that, consumption of prebiotic foods can lead to the growth of beneficial bacteria. You're including the author in the sentence, and if you do that, you include their names, and then you put the date of the reference there. But if you don't include the authors in the sentence, then the alternative would be prebiotic foods may contribute to the increase of growth of beneficial bacteria. That's the sentence, and then you put the citation at the end. Okay. So that's just an example of how you reference a book. I think sometimes looking at this, it can be quite abstract or kind of confusing. A lot of the time, it's just good to look at the example, and through looking at the example, you can see exactly what you need to do, We're not going to be really pernickety. If you don't have a dot after the initial, you're not going to fail the referencing AC on that. However, what we do ask is that you're consistent. So if you don't include the dot after the initial, you need to do that for all of your references. So your referencing needs to be consistent. What we're looking for is a workable reference, so that we could go and find this book if we wanted. So again, we can find where you got your source of information. So that's the book. This is in the PowerPoint. And then this is referencing an e-journal. So an e-journal is journals you find on databases like PubMed, or something that you're finding online. years ago, you had to go in and actually you get printed journals. So this is the guidelines for referencing an e-journal. So you include the author's last name, their initials, the year, the article title, the journal title, the volume, the issue, the page numbers, and then the URL that you got it from. And that's really important. You've got to include the URL that you got it from so that we can go and find the reference if we need to. This is all about being able to find the source of information that you're citing. So this here is an example. So this is the author's last name. There's their initial. And a lot of the time when you have an e-journal, you'll have more than 3 authors in the list of authors. And if that's the case, you just need to use et al. Okay, so you don't have to write out 10 authors. If it's more than 2 or 3, you just put in et al. So that's really key to note. And if you do, let's say some people, if there even is 3 authors, they might still include the first and include et al. We're not going to pick you up on that. Once you do that, the same though for everyone. The key thing is consistency. So then you include the date, the name of the paper or the journal or the article, and then the journal title in italics. So whereas with the book, you put the name of the book in italics, with articles in journals, from journals, you put the journal itself in italics. And that's really important. And we will, highlight that to you in your feedback if you don't do that. Then the volume, the issue, the page numbers, you'll find that at the top of the journal title, and then where you got it from. So available at this URL and the date that you got it. So it's really, really important that you put in the URL. So if we want to go and find the article, then we can do that. We call it's a workable reference if you can find the information in that, or within the reference. So that's it, referencing an e-journal. Then referencing a web page. So when you're referencing a web page, you're asked to include the web page author's last name, their initials, the year it was published, the page title, and then the URL. So ignore this incorrect one for a second. So you want to use O'Brien S, the date that it was published on the website, that'll be on the website, the name of the article, and then the URL itself and the date that you got it from. So let's say if it's Healthline, you don't put Healthline, you put the actual name of the author. And for most of the time, the author's name will be on the website article. So then this is a really important one because you're going to reference IHS articles all the time. So this is our PowerPoints. So UCD have guidelines on how to do this. Ours is slightly different, and I'm just going to highlight this in red actually so you can see it really clearly. And this is how we ask you to reference it. So it's the author's initial name, last name, initials, the year of publication, the title of the lecture presentation, the medium, module code, module title, institution, day, month, year. So this is how we ask you to do it. It's slightly different to what UCD says, but you can just follow. This is an example of an anomaly. So whenever you're referencing an IHS PowerPoint, you just put in IHS dot. Okay, so it doesn't matter if I've written it or if it's Melissa, you won't know that because we just put them up. And so that's why you can't put the author's name. You've got to put just IHS. Then the date. So this, if you're doing it this year, it'll be 2020. And then the title of the lecture or the presentation. So all the part names. So let's say if it was Unit 1, Part 1, it would be Part 1, Statistics on Chronic Disease. That would be the name of the part. Or Part 2, Introduction to the Functional Medicine Model. You got it online, that's the medium. And then you've got to put the module code and title. So we use units. We call our modules units. So it's the unit code and the unit title. So you'll see this is PNT, but it's actually, let's say, if it'd be NT1, Unit 6, or let's say this is going to be NT1, Unit 1, Research Methods in Healthcare Models in Chronic Disease will be the unit title. And then it's Institute of Health Sciences, and then the day that you accessed it. You don't need to put the URL in. You just need to tell us the date you accessed it, because sometimes I suppose if we're reviewing, let's say if you were to defer and then came back, you might have a PowerPoint, and you might be referring to a previous one that you got a couple of years ago or something. So that's why we ask you to put when you've accessed it. So that's how you write a reference for an IHS PowerPoint. We will give you feedback on this if you're not doing it correctly, and it's really important that you respond to that feedback and then, update it. Sometimes you might get it from the first go. That's great. But if you don't, we will give you that feedback. So it's important that you take it on board, and very quickly you'll just know how to reference an IHS PowerPoint. In terms of in-text citations then, so it's just IHS, so the author's last name and the year and the page. So IHS 2018 A, and then the page number. So this is another anomaly that's slightly different from UCD. So UCD, they don't suggest that you put the page number in the citation. We do, because throughout this year, you're going to cite the IHS PowerPoints a lot. Because they're heavily referenced and they're a really good resource for you. When you're doing case studies or elements of a report, you can use the information in the IHS PowerPoints. And because you might use it a number of times, we ask you to put the page numbers in so we can see where you've gotten the information from. Often in a piece of information as well, you'll end up citing 3 different IHS PowerPoints, all from the same year. And that's why you need to have, if 2018A, 2018 or 2020A, 2020B, 2020C. So that's just another thing to highlight. That's where the A is coming from, the B and C. It's if you end up having the 2020 more than once in your reference list, you need to put like A, B, and C so we know which reference you're referring to, because the author is always going to be IHS. So don't worry about that for the moment. That'll come up later on in the year, but we're just putting it in now. I can appreciate that some of this can be quite tedious and you think, oh my God, why do I have to do this? But it is an important skill set. And it's, as I said, once you just get used to doing it and you spend a little bit of time getting your head around it, it'll just become second nature. And this is just an example. Hopefully this kind of demonstrates to you why you might need to use the A and B. So these here, this is a reference list. And there we've got 2 IHS lectures or PowerPoints reference in the reference list, and they're both in the same year. So the author is IHS both times. So the date needs to be differentiated, because in the citation, you just have IHS in the date. So if it was IHS 2018 here, I wouldn't know whether it's this PowerPoint or this one. Do you see? So that's why you've got to put the A, B, and C. So you can see here, so it's IHS 2018A, and then you've got the title of the PowerPoint, the unit code and title, IHS, and the date the person got it from. And then this is the second PowerPoint. And if you read just here, if we start here, however, long-term use of this diet may lead to insufficient intakes of fiber, calcium, and vitamin D, zinc, and iron, and then that information you've gotten from this IHS PowerPoint. And then the text goes on, and this time you use a different PowerPoint to reference. So it's according to IHS, these 2 botanicals may be used to address bacterial overgrowth. So this is just, we don't have time to go through this in detail now. If this isn't something you're familiar with, I'd really suggest you go and you read this part of the PowerPoint. It's part 6, slide 37. And you can read through this to see how you date the different citations or the different references. This is just the final reference that we're going to look at. Okay. So a lot of the time, so in the IHS units, you'll be given essential and additional reading, and you'll be given journal articles. So usually when you're putting in the journal articles, we ask you to put the URL of where you got it from. You don't have to go and find that article online. You've gotten that article from an IHS folder, so you can just put the IHS URL where you downloaded it from. So that's all that means. So this, let me just come back up here. So this is some of the key information on referencing. As I said, it might seem a little bit tedious now, and you don't need all of this information quite yet. Some of it you do for this assessment, just one part. But what I'm trying to do here is talk you through some of the key points, highlight to you where this information is coming from, so that later on in the year when you need to reference more comprehensively, actually unit 2, 3, you're going to be referencing it all the time, that you know where this information is and you know where to go and look it up when you're creating your reference list. And it is, as I said, important. So that's the referencing. So that kind of covers, if I just come back up here, that covers a lot of them, or summarizes some of the key points from a lot of the material that you've done so far. Does anyone have any questions? You know, was that helpful? No? Okay. Okay, great, thanks. So if you do have any questions and you don't want to kind of talk in the webinar, you can just put them into the chat as well. That's another good way of kind of putting in your text. Okay, so let's have a look now. If you don't have any questions, we'll have a look at the assessment. So this assessment, it's broken into 2 parts. You've got part 1 here and part 2, and they're both short answer questions. And one of them is very short, it's like less than 20 words. And all we want you to do is we want you to read these pages of the International Diabetes Federation, the IDF, it's an organization, their atlas, and answer these questions. And the purpose of this assessment is just to show you what a good piece of information on chronic disease statistics is, what we would consider a good, a reliable source of information on a specific chronic disease, and that you've understood the terms prevalence, predictive trends, global burden, so that you can answer these questions. And, you know, for many of you, this might be very straightforward to answer. So it's, you know, it should be fine. And it's, as I said, the main purpose is just to get you reading some pieces of this document here. You can see it. So we've given you specific pages. It's quite long, but it's got some amazing, it's collated the statistics, some of them in it, or presented them in a really good way. So we can show you what's a really good piece of healthcare information, or a really good piece of information on a statistic on a specific chronic disease. The second question then is a bit longer. It's a 300-word assessment, and we basically want you to assess the quality of information in the website article. So the website here is this article here. So it's from Dr. Axe, and it's how to reverse diabetes naturally. So we want you to read this article, and using the questions in part 5, we're going to guide you through how to assess the article. So there is authority, so who published the information in your website article? What's the author's intention? What topics are covered, and are they relevant to the title of the article? Does the material or source reflect the most up-to-date research? Does the information appear valid to you? Overall, do you think this is a reliable source of information? So these are key questions that you can use to assess a piece of healthcare information. And I'm going to show you some examples of how you might answer questions like this in a second. And to pass this assessment, it is quite straightforward. You just need to attempt each of these questions and really conclude with, do or do you not think it's a reliable piece of information? And if you do or you don't, why is that? And in some ways, there isn't a right or wrong. We just want to see that you can answer some of these questions, and it's a starting point for you learning how to assess and critically appraise healthcare information. So, I think for some people this might seem a little bit daunting, but don't worry, we're not expecting you to be able to go in and critically appraise research at this stage. It's just looking at the information and making some key points about it. And I'll show you some examples in a second.
I have a question, sorry.
Yeah.
Here it says at the end of your answer, include a full reference for the website article. I don't know exactly what that means.
Yeah, so what that is we just we're getting you back into referencing. So we want you to include the reference. So do you remember when we just looked at it here? This is a reference.
Mm-hmm.
So
it says to include a reference for the article.
Yeah.
Is it include a reference for all of my answers? So my answers need to be based on other sources, or?
No, we just want you to include a reference for the website, for this URL. So we want you to reference this. What's the reference for this website? It's very straightforward. It's just getting you into it. So what's the reference for this piece of information?
Yes, okay, I understand. Yeah, all right.
Who's that? Sorry, because I can't tell who's asking that.
Sorry, it was Agnes.
Okay, thanks, Agnes. So that's the question, and then this is, as I said, if you just include the reference for this website. So you don't, if you do start referring to other pieces of information and you want to reference them, that's great, but you haven't been asked to do that. We just are getting you back into referencing, so just asking you to reference the article itself.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
And the other thing then is, so I've kind of highlighted to you that within academic writing, we usually ask you to write in the third person, but in this circumstance, you can write in the first person, because it's asking you, do you think this is a reliable source of healthcare information? So you can say, I think it is a reliable, or I don't think it's a reliable source because X, Y, and Z. So you don't have to write in the third person in this example or for this assessment. The other thing is submitting the assessment. So let me just show you this. So I haven't shown you this yet, but this is just what we are, how we ask you to submit the assessments. So this document here, the Unit 1 Assessment 1 document, you can write your answers onto this document. So if you just put down here, you know, is it yes, whatever the answer is. So what we want you to do is just to write your answers onto this document itself. Okay, so you just write them in here and just resave it as, you know, Moira Brown, NT1, A20, Unit 1 Assessment 1. Or, you know, Agnes, or who's Fernanda Thompson. And if you just put your name on the article, the document, and write your assessment onto it. So when you're submitting your piece of work, you just write onto the assessment document itself and submit it. What's also important to include here is if you include the word count at the end. So you can just write here word count and put in the amount of words that you used to answer this question. So it is important that you stick within the word count. So the word count here is 300 words and it's plus or minus 10%. So you can submit 270 words or you can submit 330 words. That's the range. But it is important that you stay within the word count. And part of the reason for doing this is because within academic writing, it's important to be able to write concisely and to the point, and that's why it's important to learn how to stay within the word count. So if you can just include the word count itself that you used, that's important as well. So let me just see, there's a couple of things I wanted to make sure that you knew. So that's the assessment submission document. I'll upload this PowerPoint tomorrow after with the recording, but just this is here. So the word count is important to include, and that's it for the moment. So that's the assessment. It's due Sunday. The submission, the deadline is this Sunday. We consider if we download the assessments Monday morning at 9, and so we consider a late submission if it's not there by 9 o'clock on Monday morning. The deadline is Sunday, but we kind of have that leeway in case, you know, someone's internet goes down or something happens. You should attempt to have your assessment submitted on Sunday night or by Sunday night, but there is that leeway in case anything happens. In terms of late submissions, it's really important that you stick to the hand-in schedule. Like we've organized the assessments so you develop your knowledge sequentially and in a certain format so that it kind of all the information layers on top of each other. So it's really important to stick to the submission deadlines. If you think you're going to be late or that you can't stick to the guidelines or the deadline, it's important to email your unit leader at least 3 or 4 days before the deadline. And then it won't be a late submission. So you'll be emailing to request an extension. There are between 2 to 3 extensions per course. And if you require more, we can talk to you to see whether you are able to stick to or keep up with the workload. So it's really important to submit your assessments on time. And if you don't think you're going to be able to submit them for whatever reason, that you email your unit leader directly to ask them for an extension. So that's the assessment. And then, so what we're just going to look at now, there's 2 things we'll finish up by 9. I just want to go through each of these parts or questions that are in part 5 and just give you examples of what we're looking for. And then I want to give you some support with just moving forward with your studies. I'm going to talk to you about different learning styles and VARC, so that you kind of have an idea of how to approach the units moving forward. So if we look at these questions, or even I'll pull them up here actually. Sorry, actually, before I go on, does anyone have any other questions on the assessment before I go on?
I'm assuming there's no quiz to do for this unit.
No, so on the assessment summary document, it'll tell you exactly what you have to do. So you can see here, Unit 1 assessment summary, it just has the short answer question. If there was a quiz, it would say it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. The assessment summary, it's quite handy, the assessment summary document, to give you an overview, because in this unit there's just one assessment, but let's say in a 5-week unit you might have 3 different assessments. So it is a good document to give you an overview of the individual assessments that you have. So you might have a short answer question, a quiz, and a group discussion or something, you know. So it'll be all on the assessment summary. Okay, so let's have a look at. So these are the questions that you can use to assess a piece of healthcare information, and they're included in part 5 of this unit, and there's audio material over them that I've given you. But what I want to do now is just show you, give you examples of what we're looking for here. So the first question is, can everyone see this, first of all?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. So who published the information? So is it a government agency, a university, a scientific journal, a health website? So who published it, and then who is the author as well? So, you know, so for example, Nature is a scientific journal that publishes articles, but then there'll be specific authors within an article itself. Or for example, if I show you this one, so this is an article from Healthline, which is a health information website. The publisher is Healthline. The author is, it's medically reviewed by George Kruik, whereas it's written by the Healthline editorial team. Okay, so this is the author. There's a better example here of an actual author. This is another one from them. So this is Healthline, and it's written by Marcia McCulloch. So this is the author of the article or piece of information. The publisher is Healthline. So with your questions or with your assessment, you want to be considering, well, you know, is Healthline a reliable publisher? You know, what information do they publish? And then who is the author? So what's their background experience? What's their academic experience? Are they qualified to write about this topic? So if we take this as an example, so this is 10 supplements to help lower blood sugar. So this is an article that gives you a list of 10 different supplements. You could argue, you know, foods in some examples. 10 different supplements you could take that might help to balance your blood sugar levels. And this woman here, Marcia McCulloch, has written it. So is she kind of qualified to write it? So we can scroll down here. And so this is Marcia. So she is a registered dietitian and has a master's degree in nutrition. And then it gives a bit more information about what her background. So, you know, she's a registered dietitian. She has a master's degree in nutrition. So she's quite well qualified, you know, or, you know, very considerably well qualified to write the piece of article, the piece of information. You can see here that she has a special interest in integrative and functional medicine, and as well as environmental health. So she's probably going to be quite pro supplement use in healthcare, because that's one aspect of functional medicine. So that's something to consider. She might have a bit of an unconscious bias there. But again, if she does have a background, a master's degree in nutrition, she should have the research skills to be able to critically appraise the information. So this is a considerable or a high quality is the wrong word. This is a well qualified author. Okay. So Healthline itself then as well, if we just go back here. Healthline, you can read about Healthline and their team in general. If you go through their bios, you know, they've got a lot of experience within within research. They are all very well qualified. So based on their qualifications, it's a good starting point to continue reading the article to see whether you think it's reliable. That being said, just because they have a good editorial board and a good team with very good qualifications, it doesn't necessarily mean that every article that they publish is going to be of high quality material, and we're going to see that now. What I'd also just highlight here is that this article is written by the Healthline editorial team. So we don't know exactly who on the team has written it. And it's medically reviewed by this George Kruick, and he's an MD with an MBA. You could question, is he actually qualified to review this article? Because the article's focus is on herbs and supplements for diabetes. This man's a doctor, and many doctors will say, we have no nutrition training really. And some of them have very good research skills, but some doctors don't have that good research skills. So just because someone's a doctor doesn't necessarily mean they are going to be qualified to critically appraise a piece of information. And that's kind of, if he was writing about, let's say, treatments in diabetes and what different treatments are used, he'd be in a very good position to medically review, because if he's acting as a doctor. But this article is focusing on herbs and supplements. So, you could argue that, a well-trained, or someone with researching herbs themselves, or a nutritionist might be more qualified to screen the information. So that's the first thing, it's kind of those nuances, just because someone might have good credentials in one area, does it actually apply to the article that you're looking at? And as I said, you're just at the start of your journey, or some of you might be already doing this anyway, but don't worry about thinking that you need to be able to critically appraise information really in a detailed way already. This is going to build over time for you. So that's the first question. So we've looked at the authority. So, this lady seems quite well placed to write this article. It would be beneficial if there was someone also screening it. Like, it is great that they do have someone reviewing it. And that being said, you could put down that she is coming from a good baseline in terms of her credentials. So then the next thing to consider is, what's the author's intention? So is it to inform, educate, or is it to sell or advertise some product? And often within health websites, it'll be both. They want to educate and sell. They might want to sell a product, and it's also a platform to advertise. And it's important that you're able to look at that. So, for example, here with Healthline, if you go into the background about Healthline, the main aim of this website, or the purpose, is to provide, accurate information as best as possible. But they're also a platform for advertising. And you can see in this really small, this small text here, if you buy something through a link on this page, we may earn a small commission. And then you can click on to see how this works. So that's important to note, that sometimes the authors or the publishers are getting revenue through advertising or bringing you to certain links, and therefore they might have a vested interest in a specific product or a service, and that's important for you to note. Now, what they are saying here is that they vetted the products and services so that they think that they are high quality and evidence-based. But that being said, they are still getting a degree of revenue from it, so it's something to consider. So is the person selling you anything subconsciously? Healthline, to be honest, you aren't really too bad. There are other health websites where they're actually selling their own supplements through it. They might not be saying it directly on the page, but they have a company that is selling certain supplements. And that's not to say that the information itself on the page isn't correct, but it is important to note, are they trying to sell something? Then the next thing to consider as well is what's the author's point of view, or is the author's point of view objective or biased? So do they have a certain bias towards a topic? And are they presenting the information in a balanced way? So if I give you an example here, just trying to make sure I'm in the right one. So this is kind of some of the language that you're looking for. So this is from the article on herbs and supplements for diabetes. So some supplements have shown promise in animal studies. However, there is currently only limited evidence that they have the above mentioned benefits in humans. So that's an example of saying, listen, there's good animal studies, but there still isn't human studies, so we need to be cautious. So it's just having that kind of objective point of view. If I give you another example here. So he's spoken about cinnamon. So cinnamon is a Chinese medicine, and it's been used, or Chinese medicine has been using, not cinnamon's a Chinese medicine, sorry. Chinese medicine has been using cinnamon for medicinal purposes for hundreds of years. It has been the subject of numerous studies to determine its effect on blood glucose levels. A 2011 study has shown that cinnamon in whole form or extract helps lower fasting blood glucose levels. More studies are being done, but cinnamon is showing promise for helping to treat diabetes. So that's an example of being kind of quite objective. They're saying there's some really good research here. It's demonstrating that cinnamon has this potential to help lower fasting blood glucose. We need to do more studies, but there is potential there. So it's that kind of language that usually comes from reliable sources of information. There's another example here. So resveratrol is a chemical found in wine and grapes. In animal models, it helps to prevent high blood sugar. Animal studies have also shown it can reduce oxidative stress. However, human data is limited. It's too soon to know if supplementation helps with diabetes. So again, it's really balanced. It's saying, look, here are the animal studies. This is what it's been shown to do. However, we need to get more research done on humans. So that's, if we come back here, so that's some of those questions and examples of answers there. Then there's coverage. So what topics are covered and are they relevant to the title of the article? So you can see here, they are in this case. So it's herbs and supplements for diabetes. And then it has a list of different herbs and nutrients. It's the same with this one. "10 supplements to help lower blood sugar levels," and it's got cinnamon, American ginseng, probiotics, aloe vera, goes through them. This question often, the information within the piece of information or within the article will be relevant to the title. A lot of the time, though, when we mean coverage, it's in order to answer the question that you have or answer the assessment question, is the information within this article relevant to you? So it's kind of a bit separate to the actual, does the article title match the content? For the most part, it usually will. So then the other thing is currency. So does the material or source reflect the most up-to-date research? Was it published in the last 5 years? If it's a web page, can you tell when the page was last updated? So and I mentioned this on part 5 in the video, published within the last 5 years is a bit of an arbitrary term. Like, it can be, a lot of ideally you get research that's been published within the last 5 years, or if you're looking up a piece of information that's been published in the last 5 years, particularly if it's a website, let's say, or a research article. However, for example, a lot of B vitamin research was done in the 90s. So if you're finding research on B vitamins, some of it might come back from be dated back to the 90s. It doesn't mean that it's not true. It's just that's when a lot of the research was done. Research in a growing field, though, or a scientific area of study, you want to have the most up-to-date research in that area. So for example, within the gut microbiome, like the research and the amount of papers being published, it's just going like that. There's a huge investment into that area. So you really want information as up to date as possible when you're looking at, let's say, review articles on the gut microbiome. In terms of website articles, that's, you also want to get articles that are published recently, because they're often covering a breadth of information. So for example, with this article, this was published in 2018. This other one here was July 2020. So they're pretty up to date. So if we're looking at that website, that's what we're looking for, the date when it was published. But then within the article itself, or the piece of information, there will also be references, and you want to see, are they up to date? So this doesn't come into play because they actually haven't included references for the statistics. But if you were looking at statistics on a condition in terms of prevalence, you want to get as up to date information as possible. Whereas with, let's say, research done on cinnamon, a 2011 study might be one of the most up to date studies on cinnamon. It might not be, not a lot of research will have been done on it for a certain time. It might be for a certain nutrient. So this will only, like, in terms of, you'll only be able to understand where the most up-to-date information is on specific nutrients as you move through the course. So don't worry about that for the moment, but just, it is something to note that when you're looking at, is it up to date? You're looking at the general article itself, and then also the research within the article. So let me see. So then the last one here is, does the information appear valid to you? So is the information supported by evidence, such as clinical trials, reviews, or scientific experiments? Is there a reference list? And what are the qualities of these references? So in terms of the quality of the references, this isn't something but you'll be able to fully do yet. Some of you might already have done research methods training before, but for many of you, if you haven't, don't worry too much about this question. You'll be able to do it by the end of the year for some types of studies. But it is important, like particularly with website articles, often the author will put in loads of citations, but actually if you click into the citations, you'll see that what they've cited isn't a good piece of scientific information. So whilst the article itself might look like it's really well referenced, if you dive a little bit deeper, the information isn't as good quality as it might appear initially. So let me just show you this example here. So, and this will be a good way to also demonstrate to you citations. So we've seen here with this piece of information, so this guy, we don't know who exactly this article is written by. This George Kruick has reviewed it. However, that being said, is he the best place to review this information, considering he doesn't have a background in nutrition? The information does appear up to date, and what's covered in the article does match the title. And he does appear quite balanced, or whoever's written it, in their views. However, in terms of the references that have been used to back up the information, or the citations, there's not enough. So if I show you here, this is an example, and this will help, hopefully through going through this, you'll start to see when do you need to cite. So chromium is one. So chromium is an essential element. It's used in the metabolism of carbohydrates. However, research on the use of chromium for diabetes treatment is mixed. So after this statement here, there should be a reference, because there he's saying, or whoever's written it is saying, research has shown that it's mixed. We, the reader, want to be able to go in and look at that research. So this is really poor that it hasn't been cited. Low doses are safe for most people, but there is a risk that chromium could make blood sugar go too low. Again, that also needs a citation. He's making a potential claim, and therefore it needs to be cited. High dose, and so does this sentence here. High doses also have the potential to cause kidney damage. So this needs a citation. So in terms of the quality of the referencing, so far this is quite low. Like, he has put in here, a 2011 study has shown that cinnamon in whole form or extract helps lower fasting blood glucose levels. So we can click into this study. And it's a meta-analysis, so this is a good source of information. So that's good. But then it says more studies are being done, but cinnamon is showing promise for helping to treat diabetes. So that sentence even doesn't feel, it could say more studies need to be done. But again, this needs to be referenced as well. Okay, so here, just before I go on, so this is an example though of where it's been referenced well. So they've said this study has shown that cinnamon helps to lower fasting blood glucose, and when you click on it, you can see that this is the study that's been cited. And so far, the title matches what they're saying. It is a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a type of systematic review. It's on the top of the hierarchy of evidence. But what you'll be able to do by the end of this course is to actually go and have a look at this study, read through it, and actually critically appraise it to see if it's a good study. Because what you're going to find is that just because it's a scientific article doesn't mean that it's actually a really good piece of information. And we're going to show you how to discern whether it is or not. I'm just going to show you another couple of examples. Where is it here? Yeah. So this is the other article on supplements. So this is magnesium. So she has here, so low blood levels of magnesium have been observed in 25 to 38% of people with diabetes and are more common in those who don't have their blood sugar under good control. There should be a reference there. I don't know why there seems to be an error with this article, but this is where if she's put in a reference, this article or this piece of information here will be well referenced. And this is also a good, accurate information. So she said, in a systematic review, 8 of 12 studies indicated that giving magnesium supplements for 6 to 24 weeks to healthy people or those with diabetes helped reduce fasting blood sugar levels compared to the placebo. However, we want to be able, this is a good result from a study, but we want to be able to go and click into that study. See, so that's the level that you're looking for as a nutritional therapist, that whenever they cite a piece of information or they mention a research study, you can go in and look at that yourself. And that's what's good quality. Let me show you this one. So this is another one. So when people with type 2 diabetes took these dosages of ALA alongside their usual diabetes treatments for 6 months, fasting blood sugar and A1C decreased more as the dose increased. And there should be a citation there. I'm sure if we emailed them and asked, it's just an error with the article, but there should be a reference there. Okay. But so hopefully that's just giving you an idea of what you're looking for in a piece of information, or how you assess the quality of a piece of information. And it's kind of through going through all of these questions, you can come to a conclusion. So for example, if I was to take this one, I would say that whilst, Healthline has produced very good sources of information and they have, let's say, a robust editorial team, the paper or this article itself is not referenced enough, and therefore it's hard to discern whether it's I wouldn't consider it a reliable source of information because I can't go and look at the references from which the article was written. So that would be my personal conclusion based on reading this. So you use the questions to come up with an overall conclusion, So give it a go. That's what we're asking you to do with, I'm jumping around here, but hopefully you'll see, that's what we're asking you to do with this part 2. If I haven't lost Dr. Axe. So we are asking you to go in. Oh, here it is. To go in, read this article, answer these questions that are listed there, and come up with a conclusion as to whether you do or do not think it's a reliable source of information. There isn't a right or wrong answer here. We just want you to include a rationale for why you think it is or isn't a good source of information, and you'll pass the assessment. You just need to say whether or not you do or do not think it is and include the rationale. And all we're trying to do here is just start you going in and critically appraising pieces of information so that you start developing those skills. And as I said, you're going to continue. This is going to layer up. Like, you'll read a review article in a few units and you'll appraise that. Then we'll give you a cohort study. So your ability to appraise information is going to develop as you move through the program. So we are near the end. I really want to talk to you about this last piece before we finish. It's just about how to move forward with your studies. Just what are different things that you can do to support yourself. But before I go on, does anyone have any more questions on the assessment? No? Okay. So let's have a look at this. So this is, these are just some tips for how you can support yourself as you move through the course. So one of the main aims of the diploma is that you can run a nutritional therapy consultation. That's ultimately the aim of the course, that you leave being able to practice as a nutritional therapist. But part of practicing as a nutritional therapist requires that you develop other skills as well, like critical and creative thinking skills in the context of chronic disease management. So I've talked to you about that this evening. So that's being able to look at information, critically appraise it, and also creative thinking skills, which we'll look at next year in a bit more detail. We want you to be able to critically analyze the use of the functional medicine model as a framework for applying the principles of personalized nutrition and lifestyle medicine. So we want you to be able to critically appraise the IFM model. We don't want you to take everything we say at face value. And then this bottom one is really important. It's very important so that when you leave the program, you can continue to direct your own learning and you can continue to develop as a practitioner, and ultimately engage in lifelong learning. So we want to support you in becoming a self-directed, independent learner. So this is really important. And what that means is that when you're out in clinical practice or when you've graduated from the program, that you're able to go and assess, what do I need to learn more about and how can I find that information, and what style of information or medium of information is going to suit me. And that will then give you the confidence to go out and practice and to also communicate the knowledge that you've kind of developed through the program and then beyond. So how do we support you in becoming self-directed independent learners? The first thing is that we want to basically draw your attention to how you learn. So you're going to get different forms of information on the course. So you can see here, you're going to have PowerPoints with audio, media, reading material, articles and textbooks. We suggest you read a textbook, and worksheets. So these are all different forms of information. And there's a bit of a change or a jump between NLC and NT. So in NLC, we give you a suggested timetable. I kind of mentioned this to Stefania earlier on in the week. So in NLC, you're given action steps of what you should complete each week and how you should move through the material. So it's quite prescriptive in how you should approach the unit material. In NT, it's slightly different. We give you guidelines of what material you should cover each week, but how you move through that material is up to you and what works for you. So for example, someone might be quite an auditory type learner and you go straight to listening to PowerPoint with audio, whereas someone else might need to read a PowerPoint first, make bullet points or take down bullet point notes, and then go and listen to the audio. So it's completely personalized in how you approach the information based on your own learning style. And so how do you there's lots of different ways or styles in which people learn, but one way to kind of identify your preferred learning style is to use something called VARK. So VARK is basically visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic learning. So what VARK kind of postulates is that some people take in information through visual mediums. Other people are more suited to listening to. Other people need to read or write. And other people are kinesthetic. They need to actually engage in activities. So you can see here, this is kind of examples. So visual learners need pictures and diagrams and illustrations. Oral learners or audio type learners need to listen to lectures or podcasts. Reading and writing type people need to take in the PowerPoints might be a starting point, but you really need a textbook because you need to actually read full texts. Other people, they actually need to kind of just get involved in the activity, maybe do quizzes or do group activities or just get in and run a consultation. So there's different types of learning styles. And what most people find is that they might have two. So for example, I'm quite visual and oral, whereas someone else might be oral and kinesthetic and visual. A reader or writer might just be that. So what you can do is you can do this questionnaire. It's called the VARK questionnaire, and they basically ask you a series of questions that helps to determine your preferred learning style. Now, it's not an exact science, but it's definitely a good tool to help you start to identify what way of learning suits you, you know? And based on that, you can kind of direct how you're going to move through the material. And if you need to find additional sources of information, what forms are they going to be? So for example, we give you, let's say, PowerPoints with audio, media, and reading material. That just comes with every unit. But as part of the unit, you might want to go off and find additional information where you want to kind of expand on a topic for your own learning. Or for example, you might hear some physiology information in units 2 to 4, and you get a lot of the topics that we've explained, but you kind of, this one aspect of it that you fully don't get. So you might ask a question on the forum, or there's additional sources of physiology information. So you can see here, these are other potential resources. So there's some additional sources like short media clips, and I'll take you in here. So Bozeman Science, this is a secondary school teacher in America, and he's made really, really good short videos on different aspects of physiology. As part of the physiology units, we direct you to them, but you might, in certain units, we might not, but you might just find him a really good additional resource, and you might look up his information yourself if you want to find additional info. Another really good resource is this team called Osmosis. They are a learning platform that create these little videos using diagrams. You can see here.
Air like a vacuum. And then during an exhale, the muscles relax, allowing the lungs to spring back to their normal size, which pushes air out.
So what they do is, you know, they create pictures and they write as the text writes on the screen as the presenter is talking. And some people just love that way of learning. It's really helpful. So you might use them as an additional source of information if you want to find more information on the topic. As I said, some other people, you just really have an affinity for reading full textbooks. So we suggest for the physiology units that you use the Ross and Wilson textbook, but if you want to go into more detail, there's also the Tortora textbook. So this is just something to consider, you know, and this will evolve over time, but it's good to kind of reflect on what works for me, how do I learn best, and what additional resources, if necessary, do I need to find. You might not need to find them, but if you do, what form of information do you want to use? The other thing that I'd say as well is, you know, some people find that walking around, listening to the audios that we've provided or listening to podcasts is a really good way of processing information. There's actually loads of good research now on walking and how it actually helps us to formulate ideas. So that's just another thing to consider. It doesn't mean you have to be sitting at a desk, you know. So that's just something that I wanted to highlight to you, that, you know, we're going to give you guidelines of the material to cover each week. It's up to you to decide how you want to move through it. And it's good for you to reflect on what's your preferred learning style and what kind of resources do you need to support yourself. You can see here, this is kind of what we suggest, is to fill in the VARC questionnaire. I'll post the link on the forum later, to identify your learning style or styles. Consider how you will approach the unit material and potentially use some of the additional resources. And then reflect on and refine your approach after you complete each unit. So this is a real trial and error thing. And, you know, some of you might already just know how you learn best. But if you're new or coming back to study and you haven't done it in a while, it is good to consider that, so that you can basically use your time as efficiently as possible and engage in the style of learning that you enjoy the most. So you're enjoying, you know, completing the material and working through it. So that's it for this evening. I'll be on the forum this week. If you have any questions, come up. If not, Unit 2 is going to be opening next week. I'm also the unit leader for that unit. And the webinars that are coming after this will be more interactive. So we're going to do kind of quizzes, and we're going to break into great breakout rooms on Zoom, so you can kind of interact with your peers. But as I said, hopefully this webinar has been helpful just to kind of consolidate what are the key points that you've to take from this unit. And as I said, maybe giving you some support as to how to move through the assessment. So just before I finish up, does anyone have any questions? Okay, that's great to hear. Okay, great. Okay, well, listen, have a lovely rest of your evening. As I said, I'm on the forum and I will speak to you in a couple of weeks. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Maura.
Oh, just actually, sorry, before we go, I just remembered one thing, and I forgot to mention this on the first webinar. And this is important for people who want to download the MP4s. So the PowerPoints with audio and the webinars recordings are going to be uploaded onto links like this. Oh, sorry, can you see my screen? No. So this is important, everyone, just for those of you who want to download the MP4s. So bear with me. Okay, so you can see down here, when we have PowerPoints with audio or the webinar recordings as well, they'll be on a link like this, and you click onto the link. Well, you've obviously all hopefully done it at this stage, and you'll see embedded on the page are videos that you play, okay? But every one of these videos is also available to you in MP4 format, and you can access them via Dropbox. So Dropbox is kind of an online storage system, and you can set up a free account. Just click onto dropbox.com and they'll direct you on how to set up accounts. It's straightforward. But all of the videos that we've provided online that you can stream or on Moodle, you can also access here via Dropbox. So you just click on this link and you can see they're all here. Okay, so you can just, if you click on this button here, you can download them, and you can download the MP4, the actual file, onto your desktop. So that's something to consider, because at the end of this year, this Moodle page will be shut down. So any material you want, you need to download as you go throughout the year. What I'm also going to do as well is, so tomorrow morning, I'll create this webinar, will be recorded, and I'll put up the link to the recording. It'll be underneath this part. I'll also, though, add the MP4 of the recording to the Dropbox folder, so you can also download it as MP4. Okay? So as I said, yeah, so that's just important if you do want to download them. But that is it for now.